Welcome to our YouTube channel, The Alien Tales, and please ensure that you have subscribed.
The ancient prophecy said she'd fall from the stars. I never expected her to crash into my barn. The village elders spoke of star maidens and chosen ones. I was just a farmer until she fell through my roof and changed everything. Barnaby Turnbottom was contemplating the philosophical implications of turnip farming when his barn exploded. Well, not exploded exactly, more like imploded with the enthusiasm of a cosmic bowling ball meeting cosmic pins. One moment he was debating whether to name his prize turnip Bernard or Beauregard, and the next, his barn roof was sporting a perfectly person-shaped hole. "Well, butter my biscuits," Barnaby muttered, adjusting his spectacles. Steam rose from the crater where his prize-winning pumpkins once resided. "That's coming out of someone's insurance policy." Through the settling dust emerged the most peculiar sight. A woman in what appeared to be a metallic jumpsuit that sparkled like disco fever had mated with Christmas tinsel. Her hair was an impossible shade of violet that seemed to shift colors in the dying sunlight, and she was floating, actually floating 3 feet off the ground, rotating slowly like a confused rotisserie chicken. "Greetings, Earthling," she announced in a voice that could wake hibernating bears. "I am Captain Nebula Stardancer of the Intergalactic." She paused, blinking large amber eyes. "Why are you so turnip-shaped?" Barnaby looked down at his admittedly round physique, then back at the floating woman. "Well, that's what happens when you eat your own cooking for 43 years. Question is, why are you in my barn, and who's paying for my roof?" "Roof?" Nebula glanced up at the gaping hole she'd created. "Oh, that's unfortunate." Nebula attempted what she assumed was a dignified landing, which resulted in her face planting directly into Barnaby's prized turnip patch. Soil flew everywhere, coating her shimmering suit in what could generously be called rustic ambience. "So much for my dramatic entrance," she mumbled, spitting dirt. The Galactic Academy never covered crash landing etiquette. Barnaby offered her a weathered hand. "You all right there, Miss Stardancer? That's quite a name. Sounds like something my nephew would call his pet hamster." "It's a perfectly respectable designation in the Andromeda sector," Nebula huffed, accepting his help. As their hands touched, a peculiar tingling sensation shot through both of them. Nebula's eyes widened. "Did you feel that?" "Probably static electricity," Barnaby said, though his own eyes betrayed his curiosity. "Happens a lot during turnip season. So what brings you to, well, literally crashing into my property? Lost tourist? GPS malfunction? Alien invasion?" "I'm searching for someone," Nebula said, brushing turnip leaves from her hair. "The ancient prophecy of Zorbondia speaks of a chosen one who will help me save my planet from the disco plague." Barnaby blinked. "The what now?" "A terrible curse that makes everyone dance uncontrollably to 70s music. It's quite serious, right?" Barnaby nodded solemnly. "And you think this chosen one lives in my barn?" Nebula consulted a device that looked suspiciously like a bedazzled calculator. It beeped accusingly. "According to my readings, yes." Inside Barnaby's farmhouse, which could charitably be described as lived in, and realistically as a tornado's practice ground, Nebula attempted to explain intergalactic politics while nursing a cup of what Barnaby called coffee, and she suspected was liquid regret. "So let me understand this," Barnaby said, clearing newspapers from 2003 off a chair. "Your entire planet is under a disco curse. Everyone's dancing themselves to exhaustion. And the only cure is finding some prophesied chosen one on Earth?" "Precisely," Nebula exclaimed, then immediately winced as the coffee hit her taste buds. "What did you make this from?" "Engine oil. Family recipe. Been in the Turnbottom lineage for generations." Barnaby settled into his favorite armchair, which had molded itself to his exact specifications over the decades. "But about this prophecy, how do you know I'm not just some random farmer who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?" Nebula pulled out what looked like an ancient scroll made of metallic fabric. "Behold, the sacred text of Zorbondia. When the disco plague spreads its groovy doom, seek ye the Turnbottom of great turnip wisdom, whose heart is pure and whose dancing is questionable." Barnaby nearly choked on his coffee. It specifically mentions turnips and bad dancing. The prophecy is quite detailed. Also mentions something about he who makes beverages that could strip paint. Nebula eyed his coffee cup suspiciously. Now that's just uncanny, Barnaby admitted. But I'm not exactly hero material. I once got lost in my own cornfield. Perhaps a demonstration would convince you, Nebula said, standing up with determination that was only slightly undermined by her wobbling from the coffee. Observe the extent of my people's predicament. She activated her bedazzled device, projecting a hologram that filled Barnaby's living room. The image showed a planet that looked remarkably like a giant disco ball, complete with rotating mirror squares reflecting light across space. This is Zorbondia in the throes of the disco plague, Nebula explained as tiny figures gyrated helplessly across the planet's surface. Notice how even our livestock has developed rhythm. Indeed, Barnaby could see what appeared to be alien cows doing synchronized line dancing. That's actually quite impressive. Do they take requests? This is serious, Nebula protested, though she couldn't help smiling. Our entire agricultural system has collapsed because our farmers keep dropping their tools to bust a move. Last week, our Prime Minister Disco pointed his way off a cliff. Disco pointed. Nebula demonstrated the move, which involved pointing skyward while gyrating her hips. It's surprisingly addictive. Even I find myself occasionally. She caught herself mid-gyration. The point is, we need help. Barnaby watched the hologram of the dancing planet with growing fascination. And you really think a turnip farmer from Nebraska can help with this? The prophecy has never been wrong, Nebula said solemnly. Well, except for that time it predicted rain and we got a meteor shower instead. Their conversation was interrupted by a sound that made Nebula's antennae. Wait, when had she grown antennae? Twitch with alarm. A low, rhythmic thumping approached the farmhouse, accompanied by what sounded like the Bee Gees being played through a megaphone filled with bees. Oh no, Nebula whispered, her face draining of color, which was quite a feat considering her natural blue-green complexion. They've followed me. Who's followed you? Barnaby asked, but his question was answered when his front door burst open, revealing 3 figures in glittering jumpsuits that made Nebula's outfit look understated. They moved with the jerky, uncontrollable motions of people fighting against their own bodies. Saturday night fever, gasped the leader, a tall alien with what appeared to be a permanent perm. Must dance, must spread the groove. Disco plague victims, Nebula explained, grabbing Barnaby's arm. They're infectious. If they touch you, you'll start dancing too. That doesn't sound so bad, Barnaby said, just as one of the infected aliens moonwalked past his window. Actually, that looks kind of fun. Fun until you can't stop, Nebula said grimly. They've been dancing for 3 months straight. Their feet are basically hamburger at this point. The infected aliens had spotted them through the window and were now disco pointing in their direction with alarming enthusiasm. Their leader pressed his face against the glass, leaving a sequin-shaped imprint. We need to get down tonight, he mouthed through the window. We need to run, Nebula said urgently. Is there a back exit? Barnaby's idea of a strategic retreat involved grabbing his emergency turnip stash and heading for what he optimistically called his storm cellar, but was really just a hole in the ground with delusions of grandeur. Unfortunately, the disco plague victims had surrounded the house and were performing what appeared to be a choreographed number from Hair. There's got to be another way out, Nebula muttered, peering through the curtains at the gyrating mob outside. What about that? She pointed to Barnaby's ancient tractor sitting in the yard. Bessie? She hasn't run since the Clinton administration. The first one. Perfect. They'll never expect us to use non-functional transportation. Nebula began tinkering with her bedazzled device. I just need to recalibrate the quantum flux inhibitor and, in English, please, I'm going to make your tractor fly. Barnaby stared at her. You can do that? Theoretically. I've never actually tried it on primitive Earth machinery. Nebula's device began smoking ominously. But how hard could it be? Famous last words, Barnaby thought, as they made a dash for the back door. The infected aliens immediately spotted them and began a synchronized pursuit, that looked disturbingly like the opening number from Mamma Mia. They reached the tractor just as Nebula's device exploded in a shower of sparkles. Bessie the tractor coughed, wheezed, and then, miracle of miracles, lifted 6 feet off the ground, rotating slowly like a confused helicopter. "Get in!" Nebula shouted, leaping onto the floating farm equipment. "This is either the best day of my life or the last," Barnaby muttered, climbing aboard. Flying a tractor, Barnaby discovered, was significantly different from driving one. For starters, there was no ground to provide helpful feedback about where you were going. For another, tractors were not aerodynamically designed, resulting in what could best be described as aggressive wobbling through the sky. "Left! Go left!" Nebula shouted over the wind and the ominous grinding sounds coming from Bessie's engine. "Which way is left when you're upside down?" Barnaby shouted back, wrestling with controls that seemed determined to send them into a nosedive. Below them, the infected aliens had formed a conga line and were following their aerial path with impressive dedication. Their leader was now using what appeared to be a disco ball as a communication device, flashing signals at other plague victims across the countryside. "They're calling for reinforcements," Nebula observed, consulting her smoking device. "At this rate, half the county will be doing the hustle by morning." "Where exactly are we going?" Barnaby asked, managing to level out their flight path just in time to avoid a water tower decorated with an unfortunately placed weather vane. "The prophecy mentions a sacred site," Nebula said, checking her notes. "A place of great agricultural significance where the Chosen One's power will be strongest." Barnaby looked around at the Nebraska landscape stretching endlessly in all directions. "You're going to have to be more specific. This entire state is agriculturally significant. It says here, where the golden corn meets the silver silo, beneath the gaze of the great harvest moon." Nebula frowned. "Does that mean anything to you?" Barnaby's eyes widened. "The Henderson farm. Old Pete's got the biggest corn maze in 3 counties, and his silo's made of aluminum. But that's 20 miles from here, and I don't think Bessie's got 20 miles of flight time left in her." Bessie the tractor had developed what could charitably be called trust issues with the whole flying concept. She sputtered, wheezed, and occasionally backfired in ways that made Barnaby question his life choices and Nebula question the structural integrity of Earth machinery. "Warning, structural failure imminent," announced Nebula's device in a voice that sounded suspiciously cheerful about impending doom. "Can you make it sound less happy about us crashing?" Barnaby asked, steering around a flock of very confused geese. "It's programmed to maintain morale during catastrophic events," Nebula explained. "Very popular feature in our space program." They limped through the sky toward Henderson Farm, trailing black smoke and the occasional spark. Below them, the infection was spreading with alarming efficiency. Entire neighborhoods had succumbed to the disco plague, with residents spilling out of their homes to boogie in the streets. Even the local fire department had been infected, though they were fighting fires while doing synchronized dance moves, which was actually quite effective. "There!" Nebula pointed ahead to where Pete Henderson's silver silo gleamed in the moonlight, surrounded by the geometric patterns of his famous corn maze. "The prophecy site, and not a moment too soon," Barnaby muttered as Bessie gave a particularly violent shudder. "I think she's about to." The tractor chose that moment to give up entirely, plummeting toward the corn maze like a very confused meteorite. They crashed through stalks of corn, bounced off a scarecrow who looked distinctly unimpressed, and finally came to rest in a clearing at the center of the maze. "Well," Barnaby said, spitting out corn silk, "we're here. Now what?" The center of Henderson's corn maze was eerily quiet after their dramatic arrival. Bessie sat in a smoking heap, looking deeply offended by the entire experience. The harvest moon hung directly overhead, casting silver light across the geometric patterns of flattened corn that surrounded them. "According to the prophecy, this is where your true power will manifest," Nebula said, consulting her battered device. "When the Chosen One stands in the sacred circle beneath the great moon, the cure for the disco plague will be revealed." Barnaby looked around the clearing dubiously. "I don't feel particularly powerful. Mostly just nauseous from the flight." Barnaby closed his eyes and tried to look mystical, which was challenging given that he was covered in corn silk and smelled vaguely of tractor fuel. He stood there for several minutes, arms outstretched, waiting for cosmic enlightenment. Nothing happened. Maybe you need to dance? Nebula suggested hopefully. I thought the whole point was to stop the dancing. Sometimes you have to fight fire with fire. Or in this case, disco with disco. Barnaby sighed and attempted what he generously called dancing, though it more closely resembled a scarecrow having a seizure. He flailed his arms, shuffled his feet, and threw in a few moves he'd seen on late-night television commercials. Still nothing. Then, just as he was about to give up, something extraordinary happened. The corn around them began to rustle without wind, and a golden glow emanated from the ground beneath his feet. Ancient symbols appeared in the dirt, symbols that looked suspiciously like dancing turnips. It's working, Nebula gasped. The prophecy is. Her words were cut off as the infected aliens burst through the corn maze, disco pointing with renewed vigor. What followed could only be described as the most epic dance battle in the history of intergalactic agriculture. The infected aliens formed a perfect circle around Barnaby and Nebula, their movements synchronized with supernatural precision. They spun, they pointed, they did moves that defied several laws of physics and at least one law of good taste. How are we supposed to fight this? Barnaby shouted over the cosmic disco music that seemed to emanate from the very air around them. The prophecy, Nebula called back, dodging a particularly aggressive moonwalk. It says the chosen one must outdance the plague itself. But I can't dance. You've seen me dance. Then don't dance like them, Nebula said, inspiration striking. Dance like you. Dance like a farmer. And suddenly Barnaby understood. He began to move, not with the slick, practiced motions of disco fever, but with the honest, earthy movements of someone who'd spent his life working the land. He mimed planting seeds, harvesting crops, feeding chickens. His dance told the story of seasons turning, of growth and harvest, of the simple rhythm of life on the farm. The infected aliens faltered, their synchronized movements becoming confused. The golden glow beneath Barnaby's feet grew brighter, and the ancient turnip symbols began to spin. It's working, Nebula laughed, joining him with moves that told the story of stars and space and the vast dance of the cosmos. Together, their dance became something larger than either of them alone, a celebration of life that transcended species and solar systems. One by one, the infected aliens stopped dancing. The cosmic disco music faded. The disco plague was broken. As the first light of dawn broke over Henderson's corn maze, Barnaby found himself holding hands with a beautiful alien woman while surrounded by very confused aliens in glittery jumpsuits. So, he said to Nebula, what happens now? She smiled, her violet hair shimmering in the morning light. Now I think I'd like to learn more about turnip farming. The prophecy did say I'd fall for a farmer. That's not what the prophecy said, Barnaby protested, grinning. Close enough, Nebula said, and kissed him as the sun rose over Nebraska, officially making it the weirdest and most wonderful morning of Barnaby Turnbottom's life. The end.